The clock struck 3:15 a.m. as Marina rested her brushes on the blank canvas, once again unable to transfer the colors and shapes dancing in her mind onto the material. Across the city, Ricardo straightened his tie in the mirror of the executive. Elevator! The numbers from the latest financial report echoing in his mind like a haunting mantra. And in a small apartment on the outskirts, Anna gazed out the window at the last stars of the early morning, wondering when she had lost that old sense of purpose that once filled her mornings in the classroom. 3 seemingly disconnected lives, bound by the same unease, the feeling that something essential had been lost in the whirlwind of modern life. The world around them spun at a dizzying speed, dragging dreams, aspirations, and the very essence of being along with it. As the philosopher Byung-Chul Han observed in his work, The Burnout Society, we live in an era where an excess of positivity and the relentless pursuit of productivity have led us to a state of neuronal exhaustion, a fatigue that transcends the merely physical. Marina stared at her blank canvas, feeling the weight of creative block, like invisible chains imprisoning her artistic expression. Her fingers, once natural conduits of creativity, now seemed disconnected from that mysterious wellspring of inspiration that once flowed so effortlessly. The walls of her studio, once silent witnesses to nights of frenzied creation, now seemed to watch her with a mute expectation that only deepened her sense of paralysis. For Ricardo, the early hours had become a familiar territory, filled with endless spreadsheets and decisions that bore the weight of monumental financial consequences. The success he had so fervently pursued now demanded its price in sleepless nights and a growing sense of disconnection from his own humanity. As Eckhart Tolle aptly puts it, stress is caused by being here but wanting to be there, and Ricardo found himself perpetually trapped in this state of inner division. Anna, on the other hand, carried in her gaze the melancholy of someone who had lost not only the joy of her craft, but also the very connection to the purpose that had once led her to choose the path of teaching. Her classes, once stages of discovery and transformation, had devolved into a mechanical routine that echoed the emptiness she felt within. How could she inspire her students to seek knowledge when her own inner flame seemed to have been extinguished? It was at this moment of destiny's convergence that each of them, through different paths, began to hear the first whispers of the alchemical hour. At first, they were mere fragments of conversations, enigmatic messages that appeared at unexpected moments, a forgotten book in a cafe, a mysterious email, a casual conversation that resonated in a peculiar way. As Carl Jung suggests in his studies on synchronicity, there are moments when the universe seems to conspire to present us with exactly what our soul needs. The concept was simple, yet profoundly challenging: to dedicate the hours between 3 and 5 in the morning to a practice of personal transformation. This time frame, long recognized in ancient spiritual texts as a period of singular power, is when the veil between the material and spiritual worlds grows thinnest. As Deepak Chopra explains in his studies on consciousness and time, there are moments in the day when our natural biology aligns uniquely with the subtler rhythms of the universe. This initial call came to each of them as a whisper, nearly imperceptible amid the noise of everyday life. For Marina, it arrived through an old artist's journal that mentioned morning creative practices. Ricardo encountered the message in an article about successful executives who had transformed their lives through contemplative practices in the early hours of the day. Anna discovered it through an ancient pedagogical tradition that spoke of the transformative power of dawn in learning. The initial call was subtle but persistent, like a distant melody that, once heard, could not be forgotten. Thus began a journey that would lead them not merely to wake earlier, but to awaken to a new way of being in the world. As the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us, the miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on the green earth in the present moment and to appreciate the peace that is available now. While the city slept, 3 restless souls began to ponder the possibility that perhaps true awakening begins precisely at the moment one finds the courage to open their eyes while the world remains shrouded in darkness. What would they discover in those mysterious hours? What transformations awaited them in that uncharted territory between night and dawn? The answer to these questions was about to reveal itself, but first, The initial step had to be taken to leave behind the comfort of deep slumber and heed the call of the silence that precedes the dawn. As Joseph Campbell suggests in his theory of the hero's journey, every call to adventure begins with a disruption of the established order, an invitation to leave the familiar behind and venture into the realm of mystery. The first alarm pierced the darkness like an intruder. Marina, curled up beneath her blankets, felt the familiar urge to ignore it and remain in the comfort of sleep. Ricardo, in his luxurious apartment overlooking the city, gazed at the glowing numbers on the clock with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Anna, naturally a morning person, found herself awake even before the alarm, as if her body had anticipated this moment. The clock read 2:45 a.m. The world outside still slept, wrapped in an almost tangible silence that seemed to have its own texture and weight. As neuroscientist Andrew Huberman observes in his studies on circadian rhythms, this time represents a unique moment in our biological cycle when cortisol levels naturally begin to rise, preparing the body for awakening. Marina dragged herself to her studio, now bathed only in the faint glow of a small lamp. The space, so familiar during the day, took on an ethereal quality at that unusual hour. The unfinished canvases on the walls seemed to whisper different stories in the dim light. As Jacobo Grinberg suggests in his studies on altered states of consciousness, our perception of reality can radically transform when we allow ourselves to experience the world at times and under conditions different from the usual. Ricardo, accustomed to sleeping only 4 or 5 hours a night, found himself in a curious state of alertness. It wasn't the usual anxiety keeping him awake, but something different, a cleaner, clearer quality of attention. In his home office, typically a temple of productivity, he allowed himself to simply sit and observe the sleeping city through the panoramic windows. Anna prepared a cup of tea with slow, deliberate movements, savoring the silence she rarely found in her hurried mornings. In her small living room, transformed into a practice space by the careful arrangement of a few cushions and a lit candle, she felt an odd familiarity, as if she were reconnecting with a forgotten part of herself. The instructions they had received for the practice of the alchemical hour were simple, almost minimalist. Begin with 20 minutes of absolute silence, followed by gentle body movements, and finally, dedicate time to an activity that nourished the soul, whether creative, contemplative, or educational. As Jon Kabat-Zinn reminds us in his studies on mindfulness, simplicity is often the most direct path to profound transformation. Marina found herself seated before her blank canvas, but this time not to paint, only to observe the empty space, allowing the silence of the early morning to converse with the void of the canvas. Ricardo, disconnected from his electronic devices for the first time in years, found that his thoughts, usually so noisy, began to quiet down naturally. Anna, in her meditative posture, noticed silent tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't quite pinpoint the reason. The neuroscientist Francisco Varela, in his studies on consciousness, speaks of moments of phenomenological suspension, instances when our habitual perception of the world and ourselves is momentarily interrupted, creating space for new understandings. This was precisely what was happening to our 3 practitioners on that first morning. As the minutes unfolded, something subtle began to shift. The silence, initially uncomfortable, started to reveal layers of depth. As psychologist Carl Rogers suggests, it is in moments of stillness that we can begin to hear our most authentic inner voice. Marina noticed shapes and colors moving in her mind with a different clarity. Ricardo felt his body relax for the first time in months. Anna experienced a moment of profound gratitude that reminded her why she had chosen to become a teacher. As the sky began to show the first signs of dawn, each of them had encountered something they couldn't fully explain. It wasn't a grand revelation or an extraordinary mystical experience, but something subtler and perhaps for that very reason more profound. A first glimpse of an inner space that remained unexplored in their hectic lives. As psychologist Roberto Assagioli observes in his theory of psychosynthesis, spiritual awakening often begins not with extraordinary experiences, but with moments of silence that allow us to recognize aspects of ourselves that typically remain in the shadows of our everyday awareness. That first practice set the tone for what was to come. It was only the beginning of a journey that would take them far beyond the simple act of waking up earlier. As researcher Ken Wilber suggests, all meaningful transformation begins with a moment of discontinuity, a break in the habitual pattern that opens the door to new possibilities. As the weeks unfolded, something curious began to happen in the lives of the three practitioners of the alchemical hour. Seemingly random events started to align in ways that defied mere coincidence. As Carl Jung posited in his theory of synchronicity, there are moments when external events seem to align meaningfully with our internal psychic states, weaving a tapestry of significance that transcends ordinary causality. Marina first noticed this in her artistic work. The colors she intuitively chose during her morning sessions began to appear around her throughout the day, in the hues of the evening sky, in the clothing of strangers on the street, in the flowers that unexpectedly bloomed along her path. Even more intriguing, her paintings, now flowing with a long-forgotten ease, seemed to capture something beyond the merely visual. As the artist Wassily Kandinsky observed in his writings on spirituality in art, colors and forms can serve as gateways to deeper dimensions of human experience. For Ricardo, synchronicities manifested through unlikely encounters. During his morning walks after meditation, he began to repeatedly cross paths with an elderly man practicing Tai Chi in the Park. At first, they exchanged only distant nods. But one day, a brief conversation revealed that the man was a former executive who had transformed his life after a crisis similar to the one Ricardo was facing. As physicist David Bohm suggests in his theory of the implicate order, the universe sometimes seems to arrange itself in ways that present us with precisely the connections we need. Anna, in turn, began to notice subtle patterns in her interactions with her students. Stories and themes that emerged during her reflections in the alchemical hour resonated with the questions raised by her students in class. It was as if her morning practice was tuning her into a deeper frequency of understanding and empathy. The educator Paulo Freire had already spoken about this intuitive dimension of the educational process, where true learning transcends the mere transmission of information. One day during her morning practice, Marina felt an inexplicable urge to visit a small art gallery she had noticed on her way to the studio. There, she found an exhibition on the creative process that seemed to directly engage with the themes she had been exploring in her practice. The curator, by coincidence, or was it synchronicity, was looking for artists for a show about personal transformation through art. Ricardo, during one of his morning meditations, experienced a sudden clarity about a complex problem his company was facing. The solution that presented itself was not the most obvious or profitable in the short term, but it carried a quality of integrity that he recognized as genuine. That very same day, he discovered that his team had independently arrived at similar conclusions, creating a moment of alignment that transformed the dynamics of the entire project. Anna began to dream of her classes in a different way. Images and ideas that arose during her morning practice naturally evolved into innovative pedagogical approaches. One day, while implementing one of these ideas, a contemplative writing exercise, inspired by her own experience with the alchemical hour, she witnessed a remarkable transformation in her most challenging students. As quantum physicist Amit Goswami observes, when we begin to pay attention more consciously, the very act of observation seems to influence how reality manifests around us. The three practitioners were experiencing this firsthand, each within their own context. The synchronicities were not confined to their individual lives. Unbeknownst to them, their paths were beginning to intertwine in subtle ways. Marina was invited to present an exhibition at the school where Anna taught. Ricardo, seeking ways to implement more humanized practices in his company, came across Marina's work through an article on art and corporate well-being. Anna, in turn, discovered that one of her most promising students was the son of an executive who worked with Ricardo. The psychologist James Hillman speaks of the soul's calling, moments when seemingly unrelated events begin to form a pattern that reveals our deepest purpose. It was as if the alchemical hour was not just functioning as an individual practice, but as a resonant field, mysteriously and meaningfully connecting people and events. As scientist Rupert Sheldrake suggests in his theory of morphic fields, when people engage in similar practices, even if separated by space and time, they can create a kind of mutual influence field. Unbeknownst to them, the three practitioners were contributing to and being shaped by a larger field of transformation. However, as the transformations deepened, each of the practitioners began to encounter unexpected resistance, both internal and external. As psychologist Carl Rogers observed, every genuine growth process involves moments of discomfort and imbalance, for we are essentially reconstructing our way of being in the world. Marina began to feel a profound unease with her previous work. The paintings that once provided her with a secure financial comfort now seemed hollow, devoid of the depth her new vision demanded. Her usual gallerists and collectors expressed concern over the shift in her style, sometimes quite explicitly. "This doesn't feel like your work," remarked a prominent dealer during a studio visit. Ricardo, on the other hand, faced even more tangible challenges. His new approach to business, more conscious and human-centered, began to create friction with certain board members. Numbers and deadlines remained important, but now he insisted on considering the human and environmental impact of every decision. As the economist E.F. aptly noted, "In Small is Beautiful," Schumacher highlights an inherent tension between human values and the purely economic logic that dominates the corporate world. For Anna, her awakening brought to the surface long-suppressed questions about the educational system. Her innovative approaches, though effective with her students, began to face resistance from the school administration, which was preoccupied with standardized curricula and metrics. As educator Ken Robinson warns, educational systems often prioritize conformity at the expense of genuine transformation. The very rhythm of the alchemical hour was beginning to take its toll. Waking at 3 a.m. meant challenging not only her own biological patterns but also societal expectations. Marina found herself having to decline invitations to important evening events in the art world. Ricardo noticed his focus wavering during crucial afternoon meetings. Anna struggled to maintain her energy during the final classes of the day. As psychiatrist Stan Grof observes in his studies on personal transformation, moments of crisis often serve as necessary catalysts for profound change. Each practitioner was being compelled to question not only their habits, but their most fundamental identities. Marina began to wonder whether the price of her artistic authenticity would be the very career she had so meticulously built. One evening, as she contemplated a series of canvases rejected by her usual gallery, she felt a mix of pride and terror. As philosopher Martin Heidegger asserts, true artistic creation always involves a confrontation with nothingness, with the possibility of failure. Ricardo faced his own demons in the early hours of the morning. Seated in meditation, memories of past decisions, moments when he had prioritized profit over human well-being, began to surface with painful clarity. Psychoanalyst James Hollis speaks of the middle passage, a moment in life when we are called to confront the choices we have made and decide whether to continue on the same path. Anna discovered that her new way of being present for her students was awakening not only their potential, but also their unresolved pains and questions. As psychologist Alice Miller warns, the true educational process inevitably touches on old wounds, both of the students and the educators. Sleep, or the lack thereof, has become a central theme. As neuroscientist Matthew Walker explains, drastically altering our sleep patterns can have profound consequences on our physiology and psychology. Each of the practitioners experienced moments of intense doubt. Was it worth continuing? Was the price of awakening too high? It was in the depths of this questioning that something began to shift. As psychologist James Hillman observes, it is often precisely in the moment of greatest darkness that we find the seeds of our most significant transformation. For Marina, Ricardo, and Anna, the true alchemy began when they stopped fighting against the difficulties and started observing them as an integral part of the process. Marina discovered that her new paintings, though they challenged market expectations, possessed a quality that transcended commercial considerations. On a particularly quiet morning, as he watched the dawn light transform the colors in his studio, he grasped something that the philosopher Merleau-Ponty had articulated in his writings. On art, true creation is not a representation of the world, but a form of participation in the mystery of existence. Ricardo began to realize that his new approach to business, far from being an obstacle, was actually revealing opportunities that had previously gone unnoticed. As organizational theorist Peter Senge suggests, the most resilient companies are those capable of functioning like living organisms, adapting and evolving in response to changes in their environment. His insistence on considering the human factor in corporate decisions began to attract collaborators and partners who shared similar values. For Anna, the transformation manifested through a deeper understanding of the true meaning of education. As the philosopher Martin Buber proposes, true learning occurs not through the transmission of information, but through the authentic encounter between human beings. Her classes, now infused with the quality of presence she cultivated during the alchemical hour, began to awaken in her students not just an interest in knowledge, but a genuine curiosity about life. It was during this period that each of them began to notice subtle yet profound changes in their bodies and minds. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio speaks of the inseparability of emotion, reason, and the physical body, a truth that practitioners of the alchemical hour were experiencing firsthand. Marina realized that her artistic intuition now flowed not just from her mind, but from a deeper bodily wisdom. Ricardo discovered that his most successful decisions came not from exhaustive analysis, but from moments of clarity that engaged his entire being. Anna began to feel a deeper connection with her students, as if she could read their unspoken needs through their body language and energy. As psychologist Roberto Assagioli observes in his theory of psychosynthesis, true personal transformation involves not only the conscious mind, but a reorganization of all levels of being: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. The three practitioners were experiencing this integration in a vivid and tangible way. Marina began to incorporate bodily movements into her creative process, discovering that certain postures and gestures could unlock states of consciousness particularly fertile for her art. Ricardo introduced moments of conscious pause into his meetings, allowing important decisions to emerge from a space of collective clarity. Anna developed exercises that combined movement, breathing, and learning, creating an atmosphere of total engagement in her classes. Psychologist Eugene Gendlin, in his work on focusing, speaks about the importance of attending to the felt sense, a form of bodily knowing that precedes verbal thought. Practitioners of the alchemical hour were naturally cultivating this ability, uncovering a form of intelligence that transcended mere rationality. The practices themselves began to evolve organically. What had started as a structured routine of meditation, movement, and study gradually transformed into something more fluid and personalized. As the philosopher Henry Bergson suggests, true time, lived time, possesses a quality distinct from the mechanical ticking of a clock. The 2-hour practice began to take on a peculiar elasticity, at times seeming to contain an eternity, and, at others, flowing as a single continuous moment. Marina discovered that there were moments when she needed to dance before painting, allowing movement to release deep creative blockages. Ricardo realized that specific breathing techniques helped him maintain clarity during challenging negotiations. Anna began integrating elements of storytelling into her meditation, finding that the narratives that naturally emerged during her practice often held valuable insights for her teaching. As researcher Ken Wilber notes in his work on integral development, true transformation involves not only changes in specific areas of life, but also an evolution in the very way we perceive and interact with reality. This was precisely what was happening to the three practitioners, a fundamental shift in their way of being in the world. However, as with any true alchemical process, transformation could not occur without confronting the darker aspects of the self. As the psychologist Carl Jung observed, the shadow, those parts of ourselves we prefer not to see, does not simply vanish because we choose to walk a path of personal growth. On the contrary, the more light we bring into our lives, the more clearly we can see what was once hidden in the darkness. For Marina, this manifested as a confrontation with her deepest motivations as an artist. On a particularly intense morning during her practice, she found herself weeping before a canvas, realizing how much of her previous work had been driven, not by an authentic need for expression, but by a desperate craving for approval. As the psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott suggests, the true self can only emerge when we allow ourselves to recognize and move through our most deeply ingrained defenses. Ricardo faced his own demons in the form of a profound identity crisis. Who was he beyond his professional achievements? What would remain if all your material success were suddenly stripped away? As the philosopher Martin Heidegger observes, existential anxiety can serve as a gateway to a more authentic understanding of who we truly are. Anna discovered that her dedication to teaching, though genuine, also served as a way to avoid unresolved personal issues. As psychologist Alice Miller points out, we often choose caregiving professions as a means to compensate for old wounds. During her morning practices, memories of her own experiences as a student began to surface, revealing behavioral patterns she unconsciously repeated in the classroom. The work with shadows also manifested in the physical body. As psychiatrist, Alexander Lowen explains in his theory of bioenergetics, our chronic muscle tensions often represent crystallized psychological defenses. Marina began to notice how certain physical postures triggered specific emotional states. Ricardo realized that his perfect executive posture was, in fact, an armor shielding him from his vulnerability. Anna realized how certain patterns of restricted breathing reflected moments in her life when she had learned to make herself small and invisible. The early hours of the morning became a sacred space for this inner work. As the Christian mystic John of the Cross observes in his writings on the dark night of the soul, it is often in the moments of greatest darkness that we find the seeds of our deepest transformation. The stillness of dawn provided a safe container to explore aspects of the self that typically remained hidden during the day. However, this work with the shadows was not without risks. As psychiatrist Stanislav Grof warns, the process of personal transformation can sometimes trigger states resembling psychological crises. Marina experienced periods of intense self-criticism that threatened to completely paralyze her creativity. Ricardo faced episodes of anxiety that made him question all his professional decisions. Anna went through moments of profound questioning about her calling as an educator. It was in the heart of this confrontation with the shadows that true transformation began to emerge. As psychologist James Hollis observes, it is precisely when we allow ourselves to fully experience our vulnerability that we uncover our most authentic strength. For the three practitioners of the alchemical hour, this revelation came in unique and deeply personal ways. Marina discovered her true artistic voice not by rejecting her earlier work, but through a deeper integration of technique and authenticity. As philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche suggests in his writings on artistic creation, true art is born from a dance between the Apollonian and the Dionysian, between form and chaos, structure and spontaneity. Her new paintings began to reflect this integration, blending elements of her formal training with a raw expressiveness that even her harshest critics found astonishing. For Ricardo, transformation manifested as a new form of leadership that transcended the dichotomy between corporate success and humanitarian consciousness. As organizational theorist Otto Scharmer proposes in his theory U, there is a way of leading that emerges from the future wanting to be born, rather than repeating patterns of the past. Ricardo found that his boldest and seemingly risky decisions, from a conventional standpoint, began to yield results that not only benefited the company's bottom line, but also created a tangible, positive impact on the lives of employees, clients, and the community. Anna experienced a profound renewal in her vocation as an educator. As the pedagogue Paulo Freire suggests, true education is an act of love and courage, an exercise of freedom that demands the educator's full presence. Her classes transformed into spaces of mutual discovery, where learning emerged not merely from the transmission of knowledge, but from an authentic encounter between growing human beings. The neuroscientist Daniel Siegel speaks of integration as the process through which different aspects of our experience connect in new and more adaptive ways. The three practitioners were experiencing this integration on multiple levels. Aspects of their lives that once seemed in conflict, creativity and livelihood, success and ethics, vocation and authenticity, began to find a deeper harmony. The morning practices themselves evolved into something more subtle and powerful. As the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh observes, true practice is not something we do, but a way of being in the world. The specific rituals of the alchemical hour began to dissolve into a quality of presence that permeated every moment of the day. Marina discovered that she could access the state of creative flow she found in the early hours of the morning, even during her daytime painting sessions. Ricardo noticed that the clarity he cultivated in his morning practice began to naturally influence his interactions throughout the day. Anna observed that the quality of presence she developed during her practice organically extended to her moments with her students. As psychologist Abraham Maslow suggests in his studies on peak experiences, there are moments in our lives when we transcend our habitual limitations and touch something greater than ourselves. For practitioners of the alchemical hour, these moments began to become more frequent and more integrated into their daily experience. The transformation also manifested in their relationships. Marina began to attract a new circle of artists and admirers who resonated with the authenticity of her current work. Ricardo found unexpected allies within his own company, people who shared his vision of a more conscious capitalism. Anna noticed that her students were beginning to transform into true partners in her journey of pedagogical discovery. As the philosopher Martin Buber observes, there exists a quality of encounter, what he terms the I-thou relationship, that transcends the superficial interactions of daily life. The three practitioners began to experience more moments of this kind of authentic encounter, both in their specific fields of work and in their personal lives. The synchronicity they had initially encountered in their practices took on a new dimension. As the physicist David Bohm suggests in his theory of the implicate order, there is a deeper level of reality where everything is interconnected. The practitioners began to sense this interconnectedness not merely as coincidental external events, but as a living web of meaning that permeated every aspect of their lives. A year had passed since Marina, Ricardo, and Anna had embarked on their journey with the alchemical hour. As the mythologist Joseph Campbell notes, every hero's journey eventually completes its circle, bringing the traveler back to the starting point, but with a new understanding that transforms everything. On a particularly significant morning, the three met for the first time. It was not a planned encounter, but one of those meaningful coincidences that had become a natural part of their lives. The place was a small cafe that opened exceptionally early, a space each of them had independently discovered as a sanctuary following their morning practices. As sociologist Maurice Halbwachs suggests, there exists a collective memory that transcends individual experiences. Seated together that morning, sharing their stories, the three realized they had been part of something greater than their personal journeys. Every challenge faced, every insight gained, had contributed to a transformation that resonated far beyond their individual lives. Marina had not only found her authentic artistic voice, but was now leading a movement of artists committed to integrating creativity with mindfulness. Her exhibitions, which blended traditional art with participatory and meditative elements, were redefining how people experienced and interacted with art. Ricardo had transformed his company into a case study in conscious leadership and sustainability. What had begun as a personal practice had expanded into a corporate wellness and human development program, influencing organizations around the globe. Anna had developed an educational methodology that integrated elements of the alchemical hour into the traditional curriculum. Your students not only exhibited superior academic performance, but also demonstrated an emotional maturity and a capacity for critical thinking that astonished everyone. As the philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin observes, human evolution is not merely a biological or technological process, but a journey of expanding consciousness. The three practitioners had become catalysts for this evolution within their respective spheres of influence. The ritual from 3 to 5 a.m. remained an essential part of their lives, yet it had transformed into something more subtle and pervasive. As the Zen master Dogen suggests, when we truly practice, every moment is complete in itself, a full expression of awakening. Marina now understood that her art was not merely a means of personal expression, but a portal through which others could glimpse higher possibilities of consciousness. Ricardo had discovered that true success in business comes not from maximizing profit, but from creating authentic value for all involved. Anna realized that genuine education does not merely prepare one for tests and careers, but for a life of continuous discovery and self-realization. As the physicist Fritjof Capra notes, we live in a fundamentally interconnected universe where every individual action reverberates through an infinite web of relationships. The Alchemical Hour had revealed itself not merely as a personal practice, but as a realm of possibility that continued to draw in and transform other seekers. That morning, as the sun rose over the city, the three shared a moment of silent understanding. As the poet Rainer Maria Rilke suggests, there are experiences that cannot be fully expressed in words, yet can be wholly lived when we find the necessary space and silence. The journey had not ended. Indeed, as each of them now understood, it never truly does. But something fundamental had shifted. The awakening they had sought in the early hours of the morning had become a constant light, illuminating not only their own lives, but touching and transforming all those around them. As a final synchronicity of that morning, each of them independently received a message: Marina from a young artist seeking guidance, Ricardo from an executive questioning the meaning of his career, Anna from a teacher in search of renewal. The cycle was beginning anew, but now they understood. Each individual awakening is part of a greater awakening, each personal transformation a note in a universal symphony of conscious evolution. And so, as the city around them began its usual day, three souls transformed by the alchemy of awakening shared a smile of mutual recognition. The true mystery, they then understood, did not lie in specific practices or chosen times, but in the courage to heed the call to awakening, regardless of how it manifests. As a silent invitation to the reader, their stories stand as a testament to the possibility of transformation that resides in every moment, especially in those moments when, amidst apparent darkness, we choose to awaken to a new way of being.